Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas the high priest, in whose house the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus so that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last 2 came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. The high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and struck him, and some slapped him. Even though I've heard accounts of the Passion many, many times, the speed at which the events happen always shocks me. It wasn't that long ago that Jesus was eating with his friends in the upper room, and in just a matter of hours he is standing before the high priest and the priests in the temple, bound by guards and at the mercy of an angry mob vying for conviction. What we witness can only be called a show trial. The Sanhedrin, the highest court during the time of Jesus, was usually formed of 71 members of the temple, and it gave rulings on criminal, civil, and ritual law. Although it was a religious court, established to govern the Jewish community, the Sanhedrin had, even from Jewish sources like Josephus, become a highly politicized body, with different factions, especially the Sadducees and the Pharisees, competing for power. It is no wonder that Jesus, whose message challenged many in authority, did not get a fair trial. There are 3 things that I think are particularly striking about Matthew's account of Jesus' trial before the Sanhedrin. The first is, in a way, the most obvious, the way in which the crowd, like all crowds, had very little interest in the truth, let alone testing the evidence that people were bringing forward. It challenges us to think about the way we behave in our own crowds, especially in our political tribes. Political scientists now talk about the emergence of political tribalism, the way in which political parties are now creating a sense of identity through the image of a tribe. The danger of any form of tribalism is that it causes people to forget who they really are, as they begin to form their identity through the tribe rather than through themselves. Tribal people protect their own at all costs and aren't interested in truth, listening to the demonized other, or questioning the motives and positions of their leaders. But tribalism is not simply a political phenomenon. Churches are very often tribal too. And in becoming tribal, there is always an inherent danger that its members will forget who they really are. They can forget that they are first and foremost Christians and are witnesses of God's love on earth. Instead, when tribalism kicks in, people simply seek to defend their patch, their religious tribe, whatever it may be, Anglican or Roman Catholic, evangelical or charismatic. Jesus' trial at the Sanhedrin, even more so than the trial before Pilate, shows the dangers of following the crowd and following the tribe. The first thing the crowd killed was not Jesus, but rather the pursuit of truth and reason. It is the tribe that makes them spit in Jesus' face and strike him. The second thing is also pretty obvious. Even when the priests ask Jesus questions, they refuse to listen to what Jesus is actually saying. This too is a result of tribalism, but it also speaks of the way we engage with others more generally. Do we always listen to what someone different to us actually has to say? Or do we simply pay lip service and put on a good Christian smile and a nod before moving on and returning to those who are like us? Indeed, a Catholic has much to learn from an evangelical, as does an evangelical from a Catholic. But I think it also says something of the way we can read and engage with Scripture. Do we listen properly to what Scripture has to say, or do we let Scripture confirm what we already think? Normally, on a Sunday morning, we would stand and hear the Gospel being read. And in the reading of the Gospel, we hear Jesus speak directly to us at that very moment. But are we listening? And I mean, are we really listening to what Jesus has to say to us? Or do we close our ears and refuse to hear? The final striking part of Jesus' trial is less obvious. In his account, Matthew draws a picture of the crowd hurling accusations about Jesus, but interestingly, Matthew does not actually record any of them. It seems like Matthew was shielding Jesus and the later Christian communities that were reading his gospel from the calumnies of the crowd, from the false and baseless accusations. Instead, Matthew focuses all his attention on the only real accusation that is levelled against Jesus, that he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, which John records Jesus saying when he cleansed the temple of the money changers. Matthew reminds us of the importance of speaking good words, of not defaming others or indulging in gossip. We should speak good, not simply because it is the right and Christian thing to do, but because when our words and deeds are good, we abide in God's love and we can be a light placed on a lampstand, giving light to others. In his letter to the Philippians, Paul says something very similar. He says, "Whatever is true, whatever is honourable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." Let us not be like the crowd and indulge in bad words, but let us speak words of truth, honour and justice. That is what it means to live a life as a Christian. Honour truth, and God is honoured.